Some of the best engineers I have worked with aren't the most polished speakers, but they are absolutely geniuses in their field. So great talent doesn't always come in a polished package. We are in a world where anyone can create a perfectly worded resume in 30 seconds with AI, right? But does that mean they can do the job? Not necessarily. So, the best way to separate fluff from reality is just getting candidates to show and just not tell. The moment I see overly fitted resume and reusing the words that are exactly there in my job description and some jargons which normally we do not use in conversation or even resume writing, that's an amber flag for me immediately.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Annie. Annie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss the very topical discussion and very controversial, probably as well. Could become controversial as we deep dive into it. Yeah. Yeah. So, good evening. And thank you so much for taking the time as well. Yeah.
It's absolutely our pleasure. Yeah. And whereabouts in the world are you joining us from today?
I'm from Amsterdam. It's a cloudy Amsterdam today, unfortunately, but definitely I hope that we will get some more sun this weekend and this week as well. So, yeah, can't complain. Can't complain. Yes.
And I'd love for our guests just to hear a little bit more about yourself, just so they can start to understand who they're listening to today.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, my name is Anindita Misra, and I'm originally from India, but living and working outside of India for over a decade now. And I'm in the data and AI and analytics for over 2 decades, primarily focusing on how do we really solve business problem with analytics, be it AI applied or generative AI, as we hear these days quite a lot. But also, how do we really create insights to basically make data part of the decision making? So that's being my focus. Currently, I'm working in Decathlon as the director for AI innovation and trust. Also, very topical and interesting topic. So, definitely let's deep dive into how do you really make that objective hiring really objective?
Yes, exactly. Let's do that. And it's such a difficult topic, and as you say, almost a topic that's become politicized in the last 6 months that I probably wouldn't have guessed or predicted a few years ago. I have to say. But maybe we can start in a slightly less controversial area to begin with, and thinking now about candidates when they're going for roles, when they're interviewing. There's a tendency, maybe almost like a cliche, of overly technical candidates maybe not necessarily presenting themselves best in their interview. Maybe sometimes it's almost like a negative correlation between how technically skilled someone could be and their soft skill presentation skills. And so I feel like that's maybe sometimes a challenge for hiring managers to still evaluate them fairly. I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
That's a great question. And this is indeed a big one, especially in the engineering, AI, and data science world. As you correctly pointed out, not everyone is a natural communicator, right? And that's okay because we can't let that hold great against the candidate's back, right? So the worst way to assess, in my opinion, is that, especially for the technical talent, is just by asking them to explain things verbally. So some of the best engineers I have worked with aren't the most polished speakers, but they are absolutely geniuses in their field. So what I do normally, and I always love to also give not the talk about the problem but also the solution, is that instead of focusing too much into the verbal skill, what I like to do is let them demonstrate their problem solving by giving them a real world task, like a case study. Sometimes I pay, if possible, of course, then I pair them with a future teammate and see how they collaborate. And also, what I've realized that not everyone can answer complex questions on the spot. And that shouldn't disqualify them, right? So I give them time to prepare as well. So great talent doesn't always come in a polished package, but I think that as hiring managers, especially currently in the current situation, it's our job to see the past, see basically past their communication, but really look into their potential.
Yeah, this is really interesting for me to hear because I imagine you must have gotten some pushback at some points if you're trying to promote hiring candidates this way, because this is going against the way that most companies do it, where they really over index on interview performance. I feel like there's a cultural fit interview, there's a technical interview. It's often, I'd say, almost fully interview based as an evaluation tool, whereas you're saying that that's going to kind of miss a certain segment of candidates. Have you received pushback on this?
I did. What I try to do normally, that's why that I do fit them into the usual interview process, but provide a case study upfront so that they can prepare. And depending on the company and the pushbacks, the type of pushback that I get, so I try to kind of adapt to the existing process, but try to make sure that okay, I could also do that, fit my requirement and my ways of assessing in the way that it should happen. So definitely it's always a mix, it's always a balance between the current process without jeopardizing the existing company's culture of recruiting, but also bringing in the new culture, so eventually that could change the existing process as well. I believe that people do see the benefits of it the moment you start hiring good candidates for the roles. With the current evaluation process, I've also seen that people start to think of, okay, maybe we should change the process as well. So that's a culture change, a change management that I think every company has to go through these days. I think hiring managers should just rely on their instinct, the way they should select and find the right candidates.
Yes. Yes, I find it quite amazing how many hiring processes are set up to really not at all select the candidates that you really want and need. And that even sometimes small things could be filtering out some of the best candidates. And I can think of just straight away a few anecdotes off the top of my head. Someone I work with at Aluba, when he joined a business a few years ago, heading up the software engineering team, and he was planning on doing a lot of hiring. I think he's going to hire 100 engineers in a year. And so the HR team said, okay, well, we'll help you. We'll do the screening for you. We'll do the resume screen, the first phone screen, because it's a big volume. It's like, okay, sure. Yeah. But like, what are you going to look for? Like, how are you going to evaluate them? Because you know, someone in HR skills is a long way away from a software engineer skills. There's not a lot of crossover. And they kept kind of pushing back, and eventually they just said, "Well, we're going to filter out the weirdos, so you don't have to speak to them." Okay, and so that was their criteria: was anyone who wasn't really extroverted and smooth and savvy and what have you was going to be cut down. And he was like, "Hold on, every engineer I've ever worked with was the opposite of that. One of the ones who maybe a little bit stranger, okay, because that often correlates with them being really great engineers." And so that was a scenario where it was like their hiring process was negatively correlated with who they were looking for. And it's really, really dangerous, I think, if companies don't think about this.
Exactly. And that's a very interesting point that you pointed out. It's about also diversity, right? Sometimes we often forget that the people who matches the current team is not the best choice probably for the team as well, because then you are losing the concept of the diversity, because yes, it's uncomfortable probably, but that's the whole point of bringing and mixing, balancing the right skill in the right place to solve a problem, right? So that's a interesting point that you mentioned as well. Yeah.
And so, as much as companies can improve their selection process, at the end of the day, a lot of candidates who are technical are still going to have to go through interviews, more traditional interviews. Any general tips you can think of for technical candidates to do better in those interviews, especially if, yeah, maybe communication skills aren't their number one skill?
Yeah. I do think the most important thing is problem solving. because that's exactly what people or hiring managers are looking for into a candidate. Because at the end of it, with data or insights or AI, we're actually solving a business problem and helping people to make a decision, not just based on their intuition, which is also grounded in true data, right? So that's essentially the point. And I do also believe in the human centric approach. So I do, of course, also emphasize that the emotional quotient or emotional intelligence also should be there, that okay, we are just not building a technical solution for people, they can use it, but it has to be desirable as well. So I do believe that the balance of that emotional intelligence with the intelligence to solve the problem, that really can create a holistic, bring the holistic way of looking at a problem and eventually solve them, right? So that's I think that's definitely I always emphasize, and what I always see also from that is that people become more innovative, right? People start to think out of the box when you also challenge them by thinking from different aspect of it, and that should come from also from the human aspect that we bring in, right? So I think the both the right brain and the left brain should be really equally used and leveraged when we see something that is challenging.
And is it about then having quite a wide balance of different types of candidates or different types of people on your team? Um, and then as soon as I start thinking about that, I think about, well, a lot of companies hire for cultural fit, which to me always feels like it could be at odds with a diversity of mindset, because it almost sounds like you're trying to get people to fit into a mold, but we want people who think differently. Is that a conflict, or am I missing something about cultural fit, do you think?
Well, it's a great question because culture is important, right? So cultural fit is definitely one of the important thing that should be considered as well. But I do also feel that people having different working styles should not be a showstopper, because every team needs a mix, right? If everyone on the team is structured, you might miss innovation. And if everyone is a big thinker, nothing is executed, right? So I always ask myself, what does this team need right now? If we are scaling fast, we probably need executors more. If we are in a new space where we really need innovation, then we need problem solvers who can think beyond the box, right? So, but here's the trick: no matter the mix, we need to set clear expectations, right? So that we know, okay, this is our shared goal, this is what we need to achieve. And that understanding, the common understanding has to be there. And that's, I think, it's a leader's role to also set that boundary and the clear way of driving which direction we should take, well, which destination we should be going. And the path can be very, very different depending on the problem that we are in. And that's why I think that while cultural fit is important, um, having different mindset, having different people, having different thinking ways of thinking is also very should be very much appreciated as well. So if someone thrives in ambiguity, for example, make sure they know how to work with structured teammates. If someone needs clarity, we need to make sure that they're in an environment uh, where that's provided, right? It's not about hiring one type of person, but it's about balancing the team to reach the same goals.
One other area of hiring I've often thought sometimes descends into a very subjective type of evaluation are soft skills, and I'm using air quotes, let's say human skills. And just as a simple example, so communication. I reckon if you asked 100 people, you know, describe to me what good or bad communication skills are, you probably get 100 different answers. And so I find that often with the soft skills, they're just kind of inherently subjective. Another one is even just thinking across cultures. So, man, I'm not an expert in Dutch culture, but it's always struck me as the average Dutch person is pretty direct in their communication. the average Australian is pretty indirect. So I would say that if a Dutch person came to Australia for an interview, I could easily see how they might be perceived as slightly rude or abrasive. And if an Australian went to Holland for an interview, they might be seen as very just like, tell me what you think. Like you're waffling on, just get to the point. And so I'm not sure one communication is better or worse than the other. It's just different. So do we also have that issue of just yeah being too fixated sometimes on soft skills that are just harder to measure as well? Is that where we get into trouble?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question for me because I have worked in so many cultures, including I in Australia as well. I actually feel that Australians are way more direct than, for example, me as Indian. We are definitely extremely high context, and Dutch is indeed low context. And indeed, you need to be very much aware of when we communicate with a person who is not exposed to this cultural aspect of, or acknowledging that the other side, the interviewer, might be coming from a different culture and they might have a different way of communicating, then the interviewer should be aware of that, the cultural differences, right? When we communicate, how we operate, how we think. And it's probably not the solution or not a formula, but I do, a book that really helped me a lot to understand it at the very beginning is The Culture Map, right, by Erin Meyer. And it tries its best to really uh, map people on different skills, different aspects by from different dimensions, including communication, including leadership style, right? So that definitely I always use and keep in mind by understanding that, okay, it's if I'm interviewing a person who is from a high context region, then I would definitely expect a little more explanation of a problem rather than just a very straight, direct answers. So I might have to direct my questions and my way of getting the answer in a way that I get it right. So it's indeed a very very good question. I think that we often we often get that get that problem in the interviews because we just don't understand why the other person is reacting or giving a super, like I'm doing right now, a super high context response to your question. But it's also sometimes helped with the storytelling, for example, right? So there's always an advantage. So when I select, for example, an inside storyteller in my team, and not just an engineer who needs to build a code, but I would probably go with somebody who can tell a very elaborative story and explain the business in very simple ways. What is that they need to do based on the what the data is telling us. So there's always advantage of mixing really the right culture and acknowledging and understanding what that the benefit of that culture as well.
It's yeah, a few people now have mentioned that book on this podcast. I really have to grab myself a copy because it must be very informative.
It is. Yeah, I'd highly recommend.
And I suddenly thought maybe I should do that'd be really interesting an analysis of all our podcast guests by how long their answers are, grouped by where they come from, to see if there's any kind of correlation between their culture. That would be really interesting. I guess so. A low context culture is they just are very direct and straight to the point. Um, they would be challenging podcast guests, I think, because I would be doing all the talking.
Exactly.
Uh, one topic we have to talk about, of course, are those two little words, two little letters, I should say, AI, which is changing the world in so many different ways. And of course, hiring is no different, starting to just kind of creep into hiring, maybe more used on the candidate side than the company side, from what I can glean so far. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how companies should be thinking about using AI in hiring. Should they just be automating the whole thing? Should it still be like a AI human process? What are your thoughts on how companies should be integrating this?
Yes, I think it should be a mix. I always emphasize human in the loop, always, right? And that's definitely Not because that AI cannot do it, but AI cannot do everything, but AI cannot do everything yet. Maybe in future we will see a different AI. I don't know. But for example, at Decathlon, we don't use AI for hiring yet, right? But I do see the potential, in especially in making the process more efficient and help with balancing the biases if we can use it right now. For example, in our recruitment process, we are manually screening resumes and taking notes and interviews, and eventually we are processing it collectively and relying on is in it like a collective gut instinct to reduce bias. But I foresee that if we apply generative AI or even applied AI, for example, we can summarize a candidate's answers from an interview more thoroughly, right? But it doesn't replace the real judgment, right? So that's like I really want to highlight that part. So here's the thing: AI should be an assistant, like a co-pilot, but not the final decision maker. So because it cannot measure things like curiosity, adaptability, emotional intelligence, as I mentioned before, or how well someone works with a team. Again, yet they don't know what holds in the future, right? So definitely, it can help taking notes. It can never be a selector. It can definitely support humans to be more efficient, but uh, the final decision must always be made by humans with the focus on potential rather than just a very theoretical, qualitative, quantitative way of measuring it.
I'm wondering if there's an interesting analogy to sports recruitment because, uh, you know, I think 25 years ago or so, baseball started to use analytics in recruitment. That movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt kind of brought that to popularity. And then football started in the last 8 or 9 years. And I heard an interview just today with uh, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, is the recent new owner of Manchester United. And he mentioned the fact that recruitment has been dreadful for 10 years. They spent more than £1 billion, and as a gaping hole, he says they have no data analytics in their recruitment at all. And it's one of the leading reasons why they've tanked so badly. Meanwhile, these smaller clubs like Brighton have gone and bought all these amazing players for a very small amount of money that have just been worth so much. And so it's been this really interesting breakthrough in football where they're using data um, to kind of replace some of the more legacy ways of choosing who to buy, like more like based on the gut feel and intuition. And so I kind of feel like we're just waiting for that to happen in regular jobs, in regular business. Do you think that will happen, or is there some reason why that can't translate from like sports recruitment into recruitment of other people?
I think it will happen, but there are many risks, right? So the AI that we are using and that has to be trustworthy. So it shouldn't have bias. Like I'm sure you are aware of that. The what we have seen in Amazon in the past, right? So there's always a risk that if AI is not trained on the diverse hiring data, it can reinforce those biases, right? So Amazon's AI hiring tool was automatically filtering out female candidates just because past hires was mostly male. So while AI can definitely help scale the hiring processes, I think we definitely need to make sure that the AI system that we're using in the process must be fair, must be transparent, and must be accountable as well. So that's, I think, crucial to make sure that we embed that the potential of it's a huge potential. I absolutely believe in data analytics could definitely help making us better decision as again an assistant as a co-pilot to give us indications of all right, so signals that okay, all right, this could be a better candidate because xyz reasons, so the why behind something becomes more explicit. But I don't think that that shouldn't be the only thing. The only that shouldn't become the decision maker.
Yeah, my feeling on this is yeah, I also agree that we should apply those standards to AI, but then I also think, well, we don't apply those standards to human recruitment. And human recruitment is already so broken. There's already all these studies around, just as an example, in Australia, one from a few years ago. To cut a long story short, they found that on average, if you apply to a job in Australia with a Chinese name, you have only one third the chance of a callback, all else equal, as applying with an Anglo-Saxon name. So there's just a lot of discrimination already in the human process, and nobody really measures that or monitors that. So I see how AI, yeah, has some limitations, but is it a case of, well, so do humans? So could AI not already do it better than humans, even if it's imperfect? Maybe.
I actually tend to agree on that. And that's why I mentioned about the balancing the biases, because we all have unconscious biases, right? So let's be honest about that. So um so I think I'm not sure. I used to, and I probably still tend to hire people who click with, right? So, and what does a click mean? It's basically a bias, right? So, I've made this mistake myself. I remember interviewing someone I had a great connection with, same interests, same ways of thinking, similar semantics, and I was ready to hire them. But when I really step back and I compare the actual performance in the interview process and look at a holistic view of the others I spoke with, I realized that someone else was probably technically even more stronger. So that was a real learning moment for me, is that diversity doesn't always feel comfortable, but that's exactly why it makes the team stronger, right? So research shows, I think I'm sure you know about it, that diverse teams can make decisions 70% of the time better or most of the time. So because they challenge each other. So I think that is very important to really understand that recognizing that we have biases, and sometimes it's hard for us probably really rectify that biases in the moment, but that's why AI could definitely help us if we can make it right, and that's why that's that could definitely become a very handy tool for us for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned before as the kind of AI interview assistant. I think that's an absolute no-brainer. I mean, at least already at the moment with current technology, you could do a great transcription, great summarization of any meeting, and then you could easily have the AI interviewer also score the candidate on the scorecard that the interviewer had. It would be very interesting to kind of compare human scorecard evaluation versus AI scorecard evaluation. Imagine if there was a big discrepancy at some level, and then the AI explains their decision, the hiring manager or human interview explains theirs. It could help to uncover some of those biases that we might not even be aware of as well. So I feel like there's a lot of upside.
Exactly. And I think right now, there are many measurement framework that's out there to measure AIs, which are out there. Just you don't even have to train them upfront. You definitely have to eventually, but they're doing pretty good job, and you can definitely select based on which model which is out there is performing the best in terms of summarizing a content, which are more trustworthy, which is more reliable, which is really getting the inner meaning of the whole conversation and summarizing it in the right way. So I think if we select the right AI assistant or the right model to be our assistant in terms of AI, I believe that this definitely could help us a lot. But we need to be aware. It comes with also lot of data literacy, right? So if we start thinking about, okay, this is AI is saying that it must be right, and that mindset has to be also changed. So that's, I think, I believe that it's not about just usage, but also having the high literacy of understanding what is right, what is wrong from the human aspect. That makes the um, uh, right partnership into being more efficient.
Yes. And what I hope doesn't happen is that companies then train their own, I don't know, CV screening tool, their interview tool to say, hey, here's all the decisions I've made previously. Make more of those decisions, because all that's going to do is scale the current bias as opposed to have something that's unbiased.
Exactly. So it has to be very conscious decision on training the model in very, very diverse data if we want to build a diverse ideal workplace.
I'm sure you've seen this trend. I've certainly heard a lot about it, which is that candidates themselves are using ChatGPT or other large language models to write their CVs, write their resumes, sometimes even apply automatically to different roles, like by filling in the web form automatically. And so what I keep hearing is that, oh, we're getting all these applications. A lot of them look amazing on paper. They seem to match the job almost too well. And so this seems to then causing a screening issue. Do you have any tips for how to differentiate between this AI generated BS fluff and the real deal?
I love the question, and I'm really going through this hill as well. You can delete the word, but absolutely, we are in a world where anyone can create a perfectly worded resume in 30 seconds with AI, right? So, but does that mean they can do the job? Not necessarily. So I believe that the hiring managers need to look beyond the resume, right? So if you are just scanning a list of skills, experiences, you are not actually hiring for ability. You are hiring for who knows how to write a good resume. So instead, and probably going back to my first response, what I said, that I like to really understand and reveal the real expertise. So I ask questions like, if that's a question, yeah, it's an interview, then I ask questions like, oh, tell me about a time when something went wrong in a project. What did you do, and how did you really overcome this? And or I could also ask questions like, can you explain the concept that you just mentioned to me, like I'm a 5-year-old kid, because I don't want to be anyone's grandmother. So I believe that AI can generate buzzwords and polish responses, but it cannot fake the depth of expertise. So the best way to separate fluff from reality is just getting candidates to show and just not tell. So that's totally, I think that that should work.
And that's once you've got them into the interview stage. I guess the challenge a lot of companies would be having, though, is who are we choosing to bring to interview? Because the problem is the resume looks so good. There's 1,000 of them. Maybe, I don't know, 500 of them might look good. Uh, yeah, like, are you kind of more proactively trying to validate stuff ahead of time, even like pre screening candidates for skills or anything like that?
Yeah. Uh, I think in the beginning, I think it was a challenge, but now I realize the moment I see overly fitted resume and reusing the words that are exactly there in my job description, and some jargons which normally we do not use in conversation or even resume writing, I that's an amber flag for me immediately. I also do balance because sometimes people are using AI intelligently as well to enhance their current resume. So if I see there is a human touch or a bit more um, spelling mistake sometimes, that also gives away, okay, people at least probably at least wrote one sentence on their own and made a mistake. That's definitely shows probably that they have written it. But sometimes also that I see that they put some effort a little bit to customize the AI generated content to more human centric way. So that definitely gives away a little bit of idea that, okay, somebody used AI, but definitely to enhance rather just not blindly, generating their CV to fit some profile. So but it's I must say this is definitely more difficult than earlier selecting from 500 to the five probable potential candidates.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder. One thing I heard someone mention was, oh, a quick comparison to the person's LinkedIn profile. And so they reported finding what looked like, oh, the perfect candidate based on their resume, but it almost felt too good to be true. They went to their LinkedIn link and the profile's completely different because you can only have one LinkedIn profile, whereas you can have as many CVs as you want when you're applying for jobs. So that was a little interesting hack, but it's kind of tedious to do and pretty manual. I'm not sure how you
Yeah,
could
no,
scale that.
it's but also like let's think about it. I mean, the the trend of using somebody else to write your CV for a particular job is also not unknown, right? So today people are using AI, but earlier days people used to use somebody else to write your ATS fit or your CV for certain roles. So it just replaced by AI, which I understand. So I believe that it's also the matter of how do we really select and understand the potential of the potential candidates beyond this fluffy buzzword, jargony words, yeah, resume. I think we have to deal with it for the time being until we get to a point that yeah, gives us a better idea on how do we really select them.
Yes, and I feel like some candidates listening to this might say, "Yeah, my resume is full of AI generated fluff, but so is your job description," because a lot of the job ads, I'm sure that's one. It must be one of the leading uses of ChatGPT on the company side is to flesh out a job ad because it's so much easier just to ask ChatGPT to write it than write it yourself. But do they run the risk of then falling into the same issue if they just sound a bit too generic? Ends up being this kind of long laundry list of requirements. And do we then risk not having a really like targeted ad to find exactly the candidates that we want?
I do that. I do that because I try to simplify job descriptions. I try to always focus on 3 to 5 core must-haves instead of hundreds of uh, nice to have or should have kind of skills, and that definitely helps me clearly to separate the potential candidates that I would like to at least screen for my role, right? So I think one of the reasons I do that as well, I started to do that when I was made aware that six only I think men tend to apply for the job even if they met like 60% of the qualifications, right? As in the job that's mentioned in the job description. But the women only apply if they have qualified for the hundred all the qualifications of the skills that are needed for the job, right? So I don't want to really already upfront screen anybody knowing that this is something that has come out in the many research over the time. So I definitely try to be very objective, and that probably goes with your objective hiring, and also making sure that I give the right idea, set the right expectations. Also, what is the need for the role? Because that's also something very important. It's not me looking for somebody, it's also somebody else looking for a match for the role. So if we think from the mutual understanding and yeah, requirement perspective, I believe that it definitely works quite a lot.
I've often thought that hiring would be a lot more efficient if both parties were just as brutally honest with each other as soon as possible. And if the job ad included like a day in the life of the role and who else is in your team, and of course the salary, the remuneration, the this and that, and the candidate gave you the resume with everything you needed on it, that we could just kind of get down to it a little bit quicker. Uh, would you be up for that kind of process, or do you think there needs to be like a little bit of a dance where you're kind of holding back information through the process and eventually you find out everything once you start the job?
I don't appreciate it myself, so I normally are brutally honest if I'm hiring somebody. That okay, this is the state of the company probably, but this is the problem we want to solve, and I see that. Let's see if you think this is a challenging role for you. This is a challenge you want to accept or not, because at the end people do find out, right? So the hiding the facts of around the challenge doesn't help anybody, because then I have seen so many cases from my perspective as well. I joined a company and it was completely a different paint. The situation was painted very differently, whereas when I joined, it's like completely different in terms of the challenge was more aggressive. Of course it's nice, but at the same time it's always nice to know that upfront, because then you either come with super highly energetic if you are a problem solver and if you like that, or it will be like, oh my god, this is really worse than I thought it was. So I need to really take 10 step back to to do my job. So then it's basically slows your progress back, right? No matter where you want to go. So it's good to have the right setting expectations and the right goal as well. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right level.
What do they say? Most of life's disappointments come from a mismatch between expectations and reality. And I can tell you the first two people I ever hired, which was 10 years ago now, into a role. I was working in a company with a kind of Excel hell environment where we didn't have a data warehouse. Every month, there was this ridiculous process to combine 8 different Excel spreadsheets into one report for a CEO. It was, oh my God, such a disaster. A lot of VBA code and a lot of copying and pasting, basically. And so I wanted to hire an analyst to kind of, you know, palm off some of the crappier bits of my job, basically, so I could do something slightly more interesting. And we hired someone, and I overpitched the role. I said, "Oh, lots of interesting data, lots of opportunities," which there was, but I should have said, you know what, the first 4 months is going to be pretty tedious because we have to automate some basic reporting, and then we can start to do some analysis. But I didn't really pitch it that way. First candidate joined, quit on day 5, went back to market, did the entire thing again, hired someone else, quit on day 2. All right. So that's like a ridiculous waste of time for them more than anything. And then for me, as the hiring manager, completely demoralized, having wasted all that time and money. So, of course, you want to avoid that. So, better to be honest as soon as possible. I think that was my takeaway anyway.
Yeah, I think that might be, and we always learn from making mistakes in the hiring, right? So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's indeed, I believe that that's a mutual understanding of the problem and the state is super important to really be part of the same team because at the end, that's the whole goal, right? So,
Yes. And this goes at any level as well. Like I remember 2022, there was a company here in Sydney, tech company that had raised a bunch of money. And on the day they went bust and they shut, they had 40 roles on LinkedIn open. And my friend had joined the week before, right? And so it turned out that the company had made, I don't know, only like $100,000 in revenue and they'd spent like 10 million. Okay. So it's just a complete bullshit that the founder was running. Of course, that's an extreme example, but yeah, it always pays to be as honest as you can in hiring, I think, and from the candidate side as well.
yeah, I think it's a tricky for the startups. I have heard so many nightmare stories about startups who aim to be a scale up but didn't know how to do that, and then great concept but doesn't know how to really get to the point where actually things can scale. That just pure what I was talking about as well. That's why you need the balance in the teams. Executors and innovative thinkers, they both together, they could make sure that okay, you have a great thought but then make sure that it's really usable, desirable by so that we can scale. So so yeah, I this is yeah, that's really sad.
One thing we've done for years, because yeah, we're a startup, is we just show people our bank balance when they join or when they're about to join. We tell them exactly how much money we have, what our runway is, what our revenue is per month. So they have all the facts. If it's too risky for them, okay, no worries. Like it's as long as we've given them the information, if they join willingly, then all good. We're kind of in it together.
Yeah, that's I think that's transparency is the way to go to get the trust, right? So you need to trust each other. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Uh, One thing we haven't touched on yet is working styles. We've touched on it a little bit, but so we spoke before about the kind of high context, low context communication styles across different cultures. But then also some people who they kind of need clearer direction, others prefer the more open ended challenge. Um, uh, have you seen this map to cultural background? Like, is it more typical that someone from certain cultures would expect one or the other? Uh, what's your been experiencing?
I think that mindset is very individual. However, there are certain aspects of how people approach a problem and a challenge that could come from a cultural background. Um, uh, for example, I think that there are certain culture who sees things glass half full. and the other culture could always see a challenge as glass half empty. And there are some cultures may just think, okay, there is a glass and there is some water, and that is 50% full. Empty doesn't matter, there's some water in it. So I think it's individual. However, somehow sometimes I've seen there is a cultural aspect in it, but I haven't seen it in any study or anywhere so far, so I can't really confirm on on that from the study perspective or research perspective. But I think that's just the way of looking at a problem, and how can we really either be super enthusiastic to solve the problem without just looking at everything that could go wrong. And some cultures or some individuals also, maybe from the culture or not, cannot guarantee that, they could really think of a problem by thinking of all the risks, or not even risks, all the problems that could occur, even before starting to think about the solution. So um, it could be individual, but there could be a link with the culture as well. But I believe that that's just the way of you start thinking of a problem.
Yeah, I haven't seen data one way or another by culture, but I've seen a meme, the meme which has like it's like a normal distribution, and it's Americans' view of everything is like everything is great, good, pretty good. That doesn't get any worse than pretty good. And then someone from Eastern Europe is like, well, dreadful, crap, very, very bad. Okay is as good as it ever gets.
Yes, and that's kind of, I didn't want to say, but I have seen that indeed in the Eastern European mindset, there really a lot of pre-thought before even they start thinking about it. And there, I know the historical background as well, which is probably is coming from it with the struggle during the Soviet era. Maybe we're going to political, but that's something that we did have a offshore delivery, nearshore delivery center in Romania, and I think we had a lot of challenges getting anything done because there had to be so many confirmations they needed, reassurance they needed to start solving a problem or or starting a project essentially. So every risks had to be addressed, which is very good practice, but sometimes it's just not possible. So whereas sometimes Indians way better than there. Like, okay, there's a problem. Sometimes we say too many yes, even if you don't know, we just say yes. But there are some mindsets there that also says, okay, let's take the challenge, let's try how far we can go, and maybe we will be stuck and we will get to know a lot of risk. As long as you raise them, I believe that's how we can just get things done.
Yeah, it's probably good to have a bit of a mix. You want this sort of gung ho, underthinking, overconfident, let's just do it. And then someone says, hey, you know what, hang on, let's at least think of these three problems because if one of these comes up, we're screwed. So maybe a nice balance would be helpful sometimes.
I definitely appreciate the view of also being overly apprehensive about everything, because then, okay, like I can select 10 from your apprehensions and the rest we can park it, but let's start.
There's a scene in one of my favorite TV shows with a politician, and she's trying to get one of her policies up. And she pitches it to her team, and she says at the end of the meeting, look, I can see you hate it, so you can find all the holes with it. Okay. Let's play that devil's advocate kind of role. That's helpful sometimes.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, that's a good tip. Which one is it?
That's the thick of it, which is actually about politics in England. The Americans remade that as Veep. If you've seen Veep, one of my favorite ones as well. Uh, Annie, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you ask them?
I think that's a great question, because I was just thinking about it. And I think that I would definitely ask, what's a hiring mistake that changed the way you hire today? So I think everybody makes some have made some kind of mistake during hiring process and eventually learned how to tackle the problem in the next run. And I would definitely love to hear that from the next guest.
Yeah, and if they're lucky, they might share more than one mistake. They've been hiring for long enough. If they've only made one, they're doing pretty well, I have to say. I'm sure I've made way more than one.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, I'll level that at our guests sometime next week, and I'm interested to hear what they say. Annie, it's been a really interesting conversation today. We've covered off a lot of different ground. We've managed to keep it not too controversial in the end, I think. So that's comforting. We're unlikely to be cancelled anytime soon, so that's good. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights with our audience.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Have a nice evening.